Christmas talk series. Wow. So exciting. Friday morning, I get up, I have an early meeting, and everybody else, apart from the other person who I'll just tell you about in a second, was asleep. And I walk downstairs, and coming out of our kitchen is Oh Holy Night, playing really, really gently and quietly at just the perfect volume out of the little Alexa in the thing. And sort of half the lights, none of the big lights, just the little lights are on in the kitchen. And Grace, our 9-year-old, we've got two twins, not identical in every sense of the not identical, as this will prove. Grace is there, and she is at 7 o'clock in the morning, fully dressed, hair is combed, teeth are brushed. I can hear just over the Oh Holy Night the clink of Alfie, the dog's name tag against his bowl, which means that Alfie has been fed, which means that Alfie has also been let out and let back in. When Alfie was let out, the guinea pigs would have been let out to roam in their little run thing. The three children's bags are lined up in a row, which means, from experience, and it turned out to be true on this day, that their snack boxes have been taken out and filled up and put back in again and put ready to go so they can grab them when they go out. And I literally got up 30 seconds before I needed to leave the house. And I walk into this, and I'm just like, who is this individual who I've somehow managed to be a part of creating? Like, what has gone on? I just stopped, and I was just like, great, Grace, you're amazing. How is this, like, how are you this functional? How, like, 7 o'clock in the morning, it's Friday, like. And Grace has a brother called Sam. And Sam, it turns out, has the opposite approach to the morning. And so a long while later, Sam is forced out of bed by his mother and fairly firmly told, you need to get dressed by the time I am out of the shower. Sam does his own version of obeying that command, which is he manages to move the zipper on his onesie from here to here in the amount of time that Joe's had her shower. So Joe comes back in and is just like, you've not even slightly got dressed. And he's like, here's it. No, that's not enough. So sort of, force getting dressed, go downstairs, right, make your breakfast. So I think you said about 3 times more porridge than he's ever made before, which of course takes 3 times longer to get in the microwave and 3 times longer to cool down once you get it out of the microwave. And it turns out that by the time the porridge is just right, it's time to leave to go to school. So he's just, I'm not eating any porridge. And he's just like, so then the porridge gets put into a Tupperware. He's eating it in the car. And while he's in the car, he goes, I've forgotten to do my spellings. So Grace, the functional one, is there testing him on his spellings as they're going. And suddenly the genetics makes a bit more sense. It turns out there's one who got a lot of Joe, and there's one who got an awful lot of me. And you're just there with this sort of sense of like, sort of awkward, like shame of just like, oh, there are so many ways, Sam, in which you're, like creative and brilliant, and not that they're my things, but like I can see a lot of the stuff that I'm probably not that proud of in myself, sort of occasionally coming out in you. And there's this reality that we can have in life, isn't there, where stuff can get passed down from generation to generation. Obviously, this is just a completely sort of hilarious example of that. But it's true, isn't it? There's stuff from our past that we can feel, even without us really trying too hard, becomes part of our story. And what we're going to do for this next 3 weeks as we run up towards Christmas, in fact, all of our Christmas services are going to be framed around this as well. We're going to look at this idea of Jesus being the promised Prince of Peace. And what does it mean in a generation which is being described by almost everybody as a generation of anxiety? We're in a cultural moment which is full of anxiety. What does it look like for us afresh to acknowledge this baby that's born in a pigsty to a teenager being the Prince of Peace? That at that moment when that baby was born, a load of angels proving that God has an amazing sense of humor, like 1,000 angels turned up to a load of tired shepherds and just sang. And one of the things that they sang was that this baby that's been born is going to bring peace to the world. What does it mean for us to be a people of peace? And what does it mean for us to meet that child who grew up to be a man, who grew up to die, to bring peace to the world? And so this week we're going to look at what it looks like to be, what it looks like for Jesus to bring peace from the chaos in our past, in our mess, even back into the generations. Next week we're going to look about what does it mean for Jesus to bring peace in the middle of the chaos. And then in 2 weeks' time, in 3 weeks' time, we're going to look about what does it look for us to see Jesus as bringing peace beyond the chaos, into the future, into eternity. And so this week, we are in one of the funnest bits of the Bible, which is a long list of names. And I'm going to read it because someone should read it at least once. So maybe this will be the first and last time that we do this. Right at the start of 2 of the Gospels, 2 of the stories of Jesus' life in the Bible, we get a list of names. And we're going to read the one from Matthew. And it's going to take us like 3 or 4 minutes, but we'll get through it together. And we're going to look about what we can learn from this family tree of Jesus. What is Matthew trying to communicate to us? And so we're in Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 to 17. You get it up on your phone, it'll come on the screen. If you don't own a paper Bible, we've got some on these room dividers, and we'd love you to take one away. Take one for a friend as our gift to you. And I'm going to try and do these names, but there is a reason why we're reading all of this. So this is the genealogy of Jesus, the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, Judah the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Perez the father of Hezron, Hezron the father of Ram, Ram the father of Amminadab, Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab, Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, Obed, the father of Jesse, and Jesse, the father of King David. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Solomon, the father of Rehoboam, Rehoboam, the father of Abijah, Abijah, the father of Asa, Asa, the father of Jehoshaphat, Jehoshaphat, the father of Jehoram, Jehoram, the father of Uzziah, Uzziah, the father of Jotham, Jotham, the father of Ahaz, Ahaz, Hezekiah, Hezekiah, Manasseh, Manasseh, Amon, Amon, Shealtiel, Zerubbabel, Zerubbabel, Abihud, Abihud, Eliakim, Eliakim, Azor, Azor, Zadok. We should have looked through this list when we were naming our children. These are much more fun, aren't they? Zadok, Akim, Elihud, Eleazar, Matan, Jacob, Joseph, yay, and Joseph, the husband of Mary, and Mary, the mother of Jesus, who is called the Messiah. Thus, there were 14 generations in all from Abraham to David, 14 from David to the exile to Babylon, and 14 from the exile to the Messiah. So the key question that we need to ask in this ridiculous name, this ridiculous list of names, which would have been really common in that time. If we look into the Old Testament, we can see that there are loads of lists of these sorts of names. And it's a way of charting someone's lineage. And Matthew, in his gospel, is primarily writing to Jewish readers. He is writing as a Christian Jew, but to Jews. And he wants them to know that the promised Messiah that had been promised for generations was Jesus of Nazareth. And so everything that Matthew does, he does it to try and speak to a Jewish audience, to try and communicate that this person of Jesus, who lived and breathed and talked and died and rose again, was the Messiah that had been promised. And so this is beautifully constructed, and everything that he does is completely intentional. Every number, every amount of things, all the symmetry is something that would have appealed and would have meant something to his Jewish readers. He starts by naming Abraham and David like the two big hitters of the Old Testament. Abraham, who was promised that everything, every person in the world would be descended from him. He would be made a great nation. And then later, in the prophetic books, we find that the Messiah is going to come through David's line. And so it's so important that Abraham and David are mentioned. And Matthew's making that really clear because he says it at the start, and then he breaks it up and frames these three sections around Abraham and David. It's neat and it's ordered, and it's all meant to make a point, which is that this man, Jesus, is the promised Messiah. But I wonder if you have ever watched a TV program or a film, something that you've been really excited about, and you thought that something was going to go a certain way, and you were quite excited about the certain way that it was going. Like these two are going to end up together, or that person's going to end up losing, or this thing or that thing. And then there's some crazy plot twist, and you're deeply angry at the screenwriters. You're just like, you've got this wrong. My version was better. Never in human history has this been more profound than Prince Hans of the Western Isles in Frozen Part 1. So we've got Prince Hans, and he turns up, and Anna has been waiting in her castle for ages, unable to play with her sister because she's got some crazy snow thing that happens. This is going to be a spoiler, by the way, if you've not seen it. Well, have you not seen it? And so they celebrate her becoming queen, and Prince Hans comes along with loads of other sort of local or distant dignitaries, and they fall in love immediately. It's got Disney written all over. You're just like, this is the best thing ever. Yes, finally, Anna gets to meet the man of her dreams. He's got dreamy hair and some really impressive sideburns, and you're just like, this was meant to be. Thank you, Disney, for once again just knocking it out the park. Really easy watching. They sing a song. It's a great song. In retrospect, it's actually quite gaslighty, but they sing this song, and at the end of the song, because the song was so good, he proposes. And you're just like, wow, this has been fast, but I'm all in. And then there's a load of stuff about, Elsa letting it go and this and that. And then there's this big snowman that like throws things. And then Anna goes to help, and she gets hit by some ice and all of this. And then she runs back to Hans. He's just like, oh, my fiance, my future husband, when we sung the song together, like really love. Can you help? And this is what happens. He says literally the coldest, meanest thing ever. And it's basically like, I'm just going to leave you here to die so that I can then go and kill your sister and I can inherit your throne. Hashtag hands out. And it's so bad. I was so angry at the screenwriters, so angry at Disney, almost just the world in general. It's just so naughty, so invested in this ending well. And this is a brilliant analogy for exactly what's happening here in Matthew's genealogy of Jesus. Almost a perfect analogy. Because these Jewish readers, when they were reading through it, they would have been like, this is great. You're naming all the kings and queens, all the big hitters, all the people that we've learned about. You've named David, you've named Abraham. Yes, some of their stories are a bit messy. Yes, some of the kings got it a bit wrong. But actually, let's just ignore that and focus on this beautiful lineage that says that this man, Jesus, he's from strength and he's from power and he's from awesomeness. And Matthew goes, nope, plot twist. Just like Hans, they would have been as angry as I was with Hans. He goes, I'm going to put some things in which are so blatantly obvious to you that I'm going to highlight the mess. I'm going to highlight the carnage. I'm going to highlight the immorality of what comes through Jesus's lineage. And so I'm not going to go through everything, but I just want to pick out the things. And unfortunately, and it's not right, but the thing that would have been most obvious in this to a Jewish reader would have been the women who are named in this genealogy. Because you would never, ever in that day and age name any of the women, any of the mothers, any of the spouses. It would just be a list of fathers going from one generation to the other. And so whenever Matthew is naming a woman, he's doing it for a point. He's doing it so they go, why is he naming that person? But then it's crazy because the women that he's naming, the stories are just crazy. So Tamar, her husband died, so she marries her brother, and there's some really dodgy stuff that we're not going to talk about, and that happens with her brother. her husband's brother, and then he dies because he was naughty. And so she wants to carry on the family line. And so she dresses up as a prostitute and sleeps with her now widowed father-in-law, ex-father-in-law. And that baby that she bears is Jesus's great-granddad. It's crazy. Rahab, a prostitute, a foreigner, a Canaanite, who, yes, albeit massively redemptive work when she helped and the Israelites come into Jericho, but she was a foreigner. And actually, the whole point of a Jew reading this would be to know how racially pure Jesus's lineage was. And like Matthew is intentionally highlighting foreigners, just like with Ruth, a Moabite, absolutely despised by the Jews, that whole race, because of where they came from. But instead, Matthew is like, no, this person is Jesus's, but actually this is King David's like great-grandmother. And Matthew doesn't name every single generation. This isn't an exhaustive list. You can do the maths and it doesn't take that long, This is not an exhaustive, he's intentionally naming these people. And then the most brutal one. She's not even named in person. David was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. This is Bathsheba. The story is that King David, the famousest, most bestest king of all time, came back, probably wrongly, from the battlefronts during a big battle to just spend some time at home. And while everybody else was out fighting, he was back home chilling and eating and drinking, and he sees somebody else's wife having a bath on a roof, because apparently that was where you had your baths in the olden days. And he says, I want this. And so he sends for her to come. He sleeps with her. She then gets pregnant. So the best way around this in his head was to kill her husband. So he puts him on the front line, and he ends up, this guy Uriah ends up dying. So they get married, but beautifully in the way that God works through a prophet, like David gets called out. But it'd be so easy to not mention any of this by Matthew, but he is saying, this is what happened. That they could focus on all of the beautiful bits of David's reign, all of the amazing stuff that he does. But it says, Matthew intentionally reminds us of the mess, of the fact that this was the one biggest moment when David mucked up. But then this beautiful reality that muck up, which was completely wrong, produced a baby who became the father of the father of the father of the father of the Savior of the world. So there are some groups of people who Matthew wants to make explicitly clear to his readers then and to us now, to make sure that you know that you are included in the story of what Jesus wanted to do. There's sinners, the story again and again, and you can go through all the men in that thing as well, and there's just so much mess and brokenness. Do you think, for you, the picture I had while we were worshiping just then was there are people in this room who are walking around with basically like a rucksack full of rocks in. They're so burdened down by either their own story or the story of what's gone before them in their family tree, just like Jesus. Are you burdened by the fact that maybe generations of your family don't know Jesus? Are you burdened by the fact that there's been some mess and some brokenness? Are you burdened rightly by the fact that you had no control over that, but it still lives within you in a deep-seated way that produces anxiety and trauma and mess and uncertainty? So Matthew wants you to know this morning, and we'll get to the outworking of this, that the lineage of the Savior of the world includes the most broken, the most desperately unholy people. It also includes the most profound outsiders. Ruth, Tamar, Rahab, all people who would have been seen as outside due to their profession or their ethnicity or their gender. And Matthew wants you to know really clearly that those people are core and central to the story of Jesus. And do you feel this morning that maybe you're in a position where you don't belong? either here in church, which I hope isn't the case, or just in church in general, or like you don't belong before God, or you have a life that won't amount to anything because of the story of what's gone before. You know, Jesus later in his life, when someone was saying that's the Messiah in John, and someone else goes, that can't be, he's from Nazareth. Nothing good ever comes from Nazareth. Do you come from a place, a physical place, where it just, having been from there, you feel like you have no hope? You feel that you have no purpose. You feel that you have no story. Do you feel like you're on the outside looking in at those who are better, those who have better stories? But there's hope, and we will get there. This is very depressing. I'm so sorry, but there's a point. All of this is just so profoundly beautiful when you see it in the context of this baby that gets born to come and live and die and save the world. And the challenge that we have with so much stuff about God and Jesus is again and again and again, the task of theology almost always is that we have to hold two profound truths that seem so opposite to each other at the same time, and somehow work out how we can make them both work instead of just choosing to look at one and hide the other behind our back, or look at the other one and hide the other one behind our back. So there's loads of examples of this. There's like God's sovereignty, God's in control, and my own free will. I'm in control. He gives me will. And the Bible says both of those are things. And so we have to look at both at the same time instead of just looking at one or looking at the other. God's profound justice and also his mercy, both completely 100% totally attributes of God. But the easier way to get around it is just to hide one and to look at one, or to hide the other and to look at the other. God's righteousness and his grace. And then in this moment, and we can do this with Jesus all of the time, and I do this regularly, is Jesus being fully human. You know, Philippians 2, he did not see the grandeur of heaven, and so he humbled himself and became that of a servant. He humbled himself and became a human. He came down to our level. The Bible's absolutely clear that Jesus was 100% human, broken in all the ways that we're broken, suffered and struggled in all the ways that we suffer and struggle, tempted by all the things that we're tempted by. So he's 100% human, but the other thing, and it's so hard to hold these in tension, is he's also entirely God. In Colossians, it says the Son is the image of the invisible God, for in Christ all the fullness of the deity lives in bodily form. He is entirely God. So he's fully human and he's fully God. And the easiest thing to do is to just look at one of those or the other one. But the challenge that we have this morning, particularly in the context of Jesus' lineage, is to look at both at the same time. And this is the reason why. Because when we look at Jesus as fully human, we meet in the context of our wrestles and our struggles with the past that we've come from, we meet pure empathy. Not just a God who can say, oh, yeah, that's tough. We meet a God who came down to physically exist in this place and take on all the same stuff that we might struggle with. He would have been trained as a scholarly Jew, and so he would know the significance of all the people in his family tree and the pain that would have brought. He was born during a genocide. He was a refugee for the first few months of his life. He lived in a place where when he became slightly more famous and went back, they said, no, you're not really who you say you are. You're just that guy. You're just Joseph's son. People spoke stuff over him because of who he was and how he was brought up. He was the son to a woman who was widely considered to have been immoral outside of marriage. When we see God as fully human, when we see Jesus as fully human, in the context of our own stuff, our own baggage, the word that Jesus said to us, the word that Jesus says to us, and I believe he wants to say to some of us today, is, I get it. I get it. I get your story. I get your stuff. I get what it feels like. I know what it feels like. I know what it's like to live in that shame. I know what it's like to carry that stuff from the past. I know what it's like to have that trauma of stuff that you have no control over, but is for some reason is part of your story. I get it. There is ultimate empathy, which is baffling for the creator of the universe to be able to have for us. If we see God as fully human, we meet a being who is able to give us just the most perfect empathy in anything and everything that we are struggling with in terms of our own past. But we mustn't just leave it with that. There is also the Jesus who is fully God, 100% God. And so the same being that says, I get it, I understand, I know what that's like. He also says, I can redeem this. I can redeem this. The very story, the very fact that Jesus sits at the end of this list of broken people and brings healing and wholeness and ultimately the salvation of the entire universe through it is proof that anything that you carry, he can deal with. He can bring redemption out of. Because in him being just born, let alone saving the world, he brings redemption from all of those broken stories that go beforehand. Because in all the worst of the sin, or the biggest of the mess-ups, or the awfulness of the immorality, all of that was used by God to bring Jesus into the world. Doesn't mean that God planned it in that way. Doesn't mean that God's behind any of the stuff that brings you pain or trauma or mess. But it does mean that he can redeem it. When I get to heaven, I have so many questions for God. And there's going to have to be a big long queue of people, because I'll be there with all my questions. The big hitters are just like, what's the difference between SharePoint and OneDrive? Literally no idea. 5 years in now, just no clue. So hopefully the creator of everything can explain in a way that I can understand. None of the Fabric staff team can explain it to me, not because of their failings, entirely because of my own. So that's the big one. That'll be number one. What's the deal with the fish that has the light? What were you doing then? What was going on that day? Brilliant. I love it, but so rogue. And then probably number three will just be why was there so much unfairness? Why was there so much unfairness? Why do some people get to grow up or come out of these families or these stories where it all makes so much sense and it seems so much easier? And of course, there's brokenness everywhere, and of course, nothing's perfect. But then why do others, for no control of their own, just comes from stuff that's just so difficult and so hard? It seems so unfair. And I really think that that's going to be one of the things that I just want to sit down with God. And I'm sure when I get there, it'll all make sense. And so apart from the OneDrive, he'll still need to explain that to me. But it just seems so unfair. I think in the middle of that unfairness, I think God wants to say two things to all of us this morning. He wants to say, I get it. Whatever your story, wherever you're from, whatever baggage you carry with it, I get it because I've done it. And he also wants to say, I can redeem it. If you trust me, it might not look exactly what you're hoping for, but I can redeem it. And I will, if you'll let me. So I wonder if we could just spend a bit of time just praying together, maybe praying for each other as well. Just believing that maybe some of the stuff maybe can be broken off this morning. So shall we stand?